The day my world fell apart didn't arrive with thunder or a single cinematic moment. It came in the small, ordinary seconds that make up a life, the ones you never think will matter until they've already broken you. I remember the morning like a photograph you can't stop looking at. Light slipped through the blinds in thin, lazy lines, and dust danced in the air like tiny, indifferent stars. Clara was in the kitchen, humming that half-remembered tune she used when she was making coffee for two. The house smelled like roasted beans and lemon, her favorite soap, little comforts I'd once thought were the architecture of forever. I stood in the doorway and watched her move, watched the way her hair caught the light, how her fingers flexed as she poured. For a moment, a ridiculous, foolish moment, I thought everything was safe. I thought what we had was bulletproof. I had married certainty, not just her. We'd carved out a life that looked invincible from the outside. Friends called us enviable. Her parents adored me, and mine treated her like the daughter they never had. Our apartment was a catalog of small shared rituals. The chipped mug with the faded heart she insisted was mine. The corner of the couch where we stacked our shoes. The lazy Sunday debates about nothing that always ended in laughter. I had planned entire futures around her. A house with a creaky porch, a dog that would bark at the mailman. Anniversaries marked by the same restaurant where we said I do. I had trusted her with things I'd never told another soul. My secrets, my illnesses, the hours when insomnia gnawed at my chest, and all hers. She had been the one person I never thought I could lose. So when the first crack appeared, I didn't hear it. Betrayal doesn't always announce itself with a shout. Sometimes it slides in wearing the face of coincidence. It began with small absences. A missed call here, an unexplained text there. She'd come home late, smiling like she'd merely been held up in traffic. I told myself to relax. Trust, I decided, was the foundation we lived on. I'd rather look a fool than a jealous tyrant. But those small absences stretched like hairlines across the months until they looked like fractures in the walls. The truth found me like a stray dog, at the worst possible moment and in a place I never expected. Was at work that afternoon, buried under a mountain of reports. The office hummed with the tired energy of people holding up a world they could barely afford to enjoy. I took a break and scrolled through my phone without thinking, checking trivial messages, the weather, the score of a game I didn't care about. My thumb hovered over an email notification from our account, the one we shared for bills and the occasional joint purchase. It was a bill reminder. I was about to swipe it away when I noticed the third tab on the browser, a chat window left open. Curiosity is a small, venomous thing. I told myself I'd be quick. I told myself I was entitled to know. I opened the window. There were messages, not the guarded, mundane logistics I expected between couples who'd lived together for years, but lines meant to be private in a way that made my stomach drop. The fluorescent glow of the office screen sharpened every word, every little endearment like a knife. I read names I didn't recognize beside hers. I read photos that felt like betrayals. I read promises made in the dark that I had never been part of. The sentences were casual, intimate, a private language that stitched itself around the idea of something hidden. There were arrangements for meetings, references to places only strangers would go to keep from being seen. Men with names nothing to do with the one she used in our home. I didn't immediately call her. I didn't storm home, fling open the door, and throw her secrets into the living room like confetti. Instead, I sat there, phone burning in my hand, and counted the spaces between my breaths. The world around me, the clacking keyboards, the faint music from someone else's playlist, the office plant crying for water, became alien, like an overheard foreign film. I felt the color drain from the room. My hands grew cold. When I finally walked into our doorway that evening, the house was quiet in a way I'd never known it could be. Clara was there, laughing on the phone in the kitchen, sunlight falling over her shoulder like an heirloom. She didn't see me at first. She never did when a cell phone was involved. The device turned her face into something private, distant. I watched her, still numb, and my mouth formed a smile that wasn't a smile at all. People think confrontation is necessary. They imagine yelling and accusations and the large, righteous gestures that punctuate movies. I went the other way. She noticed me finally, and with that tiny, intimate expression she used only for me, she put the call away and came over, kissing my forehead with a softness that made my spine ache. "Tough day?" she asked. Her concern was practiced, perfect. the kind of automatic empathy partners learn over time. I wanted to throw the phone at her. I wanted to tear my hands through her hair and find the names inside. But a different animal had taken over me, one that surveyed damage and appraised it with a cold clinical eye. "What did you do today?" I asked instead. My voice was a place of ice, calm to the point of being surgical. Throwing the first stone seemed petty. She told me ordinary things, the way people do when the sky is blue and their partner's world is on fire. She stacked plates in the sink. She hummed the same tune she'd been humming that morning. She moved like a woman who hadn't just folded my life into paperwork and mailed it away. Later that night, when the house slept and the city outside sounded like distant ocean waves, I sat in the dark and let my thoughts run the perimeter of everything I'd loved. Memory became an unfair narrator, amplifying the innocent moments into keys that unlocked the enormity of what had been stolen. It wasn't just the mechanical details of plans or payments. It was the intimacy, the private currency between two people. The way she'd rest her head against my shoulder, the way our hands fit together like an answer to an old prayer. Someone else had been given that language. Someone else had been allowed into my interior. I thought of revenge then, and I'll admit it. The first thoughts were not noble. They were small, petulant. I imagined calling her in public, ripping open the neat fabric of her life and watching the seams unravel. I imagined spectacle. But spectacle scratches the surface. It doesn't excavate the root. I knew this because beneath the infantile hunger to make her blush with shame, there was a deeper thing. Humiliation is loud and temporary. The quiet, calculating thing that gnawed at me wanted something else. Not to burn a house down, but to rearrange its foundation so nothing built on it could stand. That night, in the silence, I made a decision. I would not let my life be a scene in someone else's story. I would not allow the narrative, so skillfully hijacked, to flatten me into the role of the betrayed, the pitiable. I would become the author. I would rewrite the last chapter of our story in handwriting she couldn't mistake. People imagine vengeance as a fire, hot, immediate, dazzling. Mine was a winter. It would be slow. It would be patient. It would be the sort of cold that makes one reconsider what warmth even meant in the first place. I started small. I watched. I learned her rhythms like a cartographer mapping coastlines. I cataloged her lies and labeled them with dates and times. I kept quiet about the messages I'd seen. I pretended everything was as it had always been, and in that pretense I found my advantage. When someone thinks you're blind, they move with more confidence. When someone believes another man's house is still intact, they bring their furniture slowly, confidently. I let Clara build while I quietly dismantled the scaffolding beneath her. But in the beginning, my revenge wasn't about destruction. It was about reclamation. I needed proof for myself that what she'd done was real. I needed to see the network of secrecy spread like roots beneath the soil of our life. So I read, not her messages only. I read the spaces where she hid parts of herself. The receipts from dinners she never told me about. The timesheets with strange addresses. The breathless tone in her messages that was invisible in person. Every secret was a breadcrumb. I kept them not as trophies but as evidence. The accumulation of truth, gathered patiently, became a map to something larger than anger. It became the thing I used to decide how exactly to end what she had started. There were moments, late at night when the house felt like a stage set, when the enormity of what I was doing hit me like a wave. I would stand at the window and watch the streetlights spill across the pavement and ask myself if I was becoming what I had hated. Did I want her to suffer the way I had? Was this cruelty or survival? Sometimes the answers blurred. But whatever turbulence rose, one truth remained. I would not be reduced to sobs and unartful scenes. I would not be the story she told herself when she wanted to feel powerful. I would be the quiet instrument that rewrote the melody until her favorite song sounded foreign. Weeks passed. The world, of course, kept spinning. The same people said the same polite things about the weather and weekend plans. Friends asked why we seemed distant. I smiled and said nothing. Clara never noticed the changes at first. Why would she? Her hands were full of other lives. But cracks widened. She left a message unsent, a receipt under the couch, a pattern of lying she could no longer hide behind charm. I began to nudge the world around her, subtly at first. A misplaced invitation delivered to the wrong address. a casual mention in the wrong ear. Small, precise inconveniences that the beginning of love never announces itself as the start of a tragedy. It tiptoes in quietly, gentle, disarming, and almost sacred. When I met Clara, I didn't know that moment in the bookstore would become the cornerstone of every joy and every heartbreak that would follow. It was an ordinary Tuesday, the kind of day you forget before the week even ends. I had just come from a meeting that had gone better than expected. A big contract, a few congratulatory handshakes, the illusion of control over life's unpredictable turns. I'd stopped at that small corner bookstore simply because I could. I wanted a reward, something small, maybe a good read, maybe just a bit of quiet, and then I heard her laughter. It was light, effortless, the kind of sound that makes you look up even when you don't know why. There's laughter that's polite and there's laughter that's real, the kind that makes the air around it feel alive. Hers was the latter. I followed it instinctively as if the sound itself carried a direction. 2 aisles over in the fiction section I saw her. She was holding a worn paperback, her fingers tracing the edges of the page. Her head tilted back slightly, her lips parted in amusement. Her hair, a soft cascade of brown and gold, caught the sunlight from the window in streaks. She wasn't striking in the way models are. She was beautiful in a way that made you pause, the kind of beauty you don't notice all at once but feel growing on you, quietly, deeply. Then she caught me looking. Most people look away when they're caught staring, not Clara. She smiled, a simple, unguarded smile that somehow managed to make the world quieter. It wasn't flirtatious or forced. It was warm, inviting, as if she was saying, "I see you too." Something inside me shifted. I approached her, fumbling for something casual to say. My brain, always so ready with business pitches and negotiation points, went blank. I glanced at the book in her hand, The Night Circus, and said something foolish about how I'd always meant to read it but never found the time. She laughed again, that same melodic sound that seemed to pull gravity toward her. "You should," she said. "It's the kind of story that reminds you magic can exist in the everyday." That line, "magic can exist in the everyday," stayed with me long after we left the bookstore. We talked for a few minutes about books, then work, then the little things people talk about when they don't yet know how much those conversations will come to mean. She told me she worked in marketing for a nonprofit. "Less money but more heart," she said. I told her about my job in corporate consulting, how I'd been chasing deadlines for years without really stopping to ask what came after success. She tilted her head slightly and asked, "So what does come after success?" No one had ever asked me that before. I didn't have an answer, but she smiled like she understood. And for some reason I felt as if she did. When we finally parted ways, I assumed that would be the end, a pleasant encounter filed away in the drawer of nice memories. But fate, it seemed, wasn't done weaving. The next day I went back to the bookstore, not because I needed another book, but because I needed to know if that moment had been real. She was there again in the same aisle, reading the same book. I laughed softly when I saw her and said, "I'm beginning to think you live here." She smiled. "Maybe I do, or maybe you just keep showing up." That afternoon turned into coffee. Coffee turned into laughter, shared stories, and a quiet connection that felt older than it was. By the end of the week, we'd moved past small talk. We talked about dreams, about loss, about faith and fear, and the kind of love our parents never found. It felt like meeting someone who spoke a language I'd been trying to learn my whole life. One evening, after our third or fourth coffee, we walked for hours through the city. The streets glowed gold under the streetlights, the kind of glow that makes everything look softer than it is. She walked beside me, her hands tucked in her coat pockets, talking about how she'd once wanted to be a painter. I told her I'd once wanted to be a writer but traded words for spreadsheets. "Then write again," she said. "Maybe not for the world, maybe just for yourself." That night when I got home, I picked up a pen for the first time in years. I wrote a single line in my journal. "I think I met someone who makes the world feel less empty." And I meant it. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. We moved through seasons together, our lives folding into each other's like chapters of a book that refused to end. I remember one evening in winter. She was curled up on my couch wearing one of my old sweaters, hair messy, a cup of tea warming her hands. Snow fell outside the window in soft, steady flakes. The world felt still, suspended between heartbeats. She looked up and said quietly, "I don't need much in this world. Just you. As long as I have you, I'm happy." And I believed her. God, I believed every word. That night I kissed her forehead and promised myself that I'd protect that happiness no matter what it took. I wasn't a man who fell easily. My life had been a ladder of careful steps: school, career, stability. I built things. I planned. But Clara wasn't something I built. She was something I found. And in her I found everything I didn't know I was missing. Laughter that filled silence, understanding that needed no translation, and a sense of peace that felt almost holy. I worked harder after that. I picked up extra projects, stayed late at the office. Every overtime hour wasn't for money, it was for us. For the house we'd one day buy, for the vacations we'd dreamt of, for the wedding she said she wanted in the countryside with fairy lights and violins. Every tired morning was worth it because her smile made the fatigue dissolve. She had this way of making ordinary moments feel like eternity. A quiet dinner at home felt like a scene from a love story. A simple drive on a rainy evening felt like destiny, unfolding in real time. There was one night, I still remember it vividly. We were on the balcony, the city lights shimmering below. She leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "You ever think some people are meant to find each other again and again, no matter how many lives they live?" I laughed softly. "You believe in soulmates?" She nodded. "I believe in you." It was a line that could have sounded rehearsed from anyone else, but from Clara it felt like truth. Those were the golden days, before the cracks, before the quiet distance, before the lies. Back then, every morning felt like the first page of something timeless. I'd wake up to her beside me, hair scattered across the pillow, breathing softly. Sometimes I'd just watch her, memorizing the curve of her face, the shape of her lips. I remember thinking, this is what forever looks like. We traveled a little. Weekend getaways, road trips with playlists she made, half-filled journals of our shared adventures. She loved taking photographs, always capturing small, imperfect things. A coffee stain shaped like a heart, a shadow on the wall, my hand reaching for hers. "You never realize how beautiful life is," she'd say, "until you start paying attention to the little things." She taught me that. For a long time, I thought that was what love was, and the sum of all those little things. The whispered goodnights, the inside jokes, the comfort of knowing that someone was waiting at home just for you. Everyone around us said we were perfect. "You two are made for each other," they'd say, and I'd smile because I believed them. We looked like the picture of stability, of unshakable devotion, the kind of love that songs are written about. If only they knew how fragile perfection really is. Because here's the cruel irony about love. When it feels eternal, you stop guarding it. You start believing it's indestructible, that it will always be there, waiting, forgiving, unchanged. You start taking comfort for granted, assuming loyalty is as natural as breathing. I did. And that's how the first cracks form. Not through arguments or distance, but through trust. Through believing something so fiercely that you forget it can break. Looking back now, I see all the little signs I ignored. The way her eyes sometimes wandered during dinner. The pauses between her sentences. The moments she seemed elsewhere. But at the time, I didn't think much of it. Why would I? She was my forever. Love blinds you gently. It doesn't rip away reason. It lulls it to sleep. It whispers, "You're safe." Even when danger is already at the door. I built my world around Clara, not out of obsession, but out of faith. She became my reason to work harder, to dream bigger, to live better. I believed we were writing an eternal story, one that would end with gray hair, grandchildren, and warm coffee shared in quiet mornings. But some stories aren't meant to end the way we imagine. Sometimes, eternity has an expiration date, one you never see coming until it's too late, and the most painful truth of all, you don't hear it breaking. You just wake up one day and realize the silence between you isn't peace anymore. It's the sound of love dying quietly, beautifully, like a sunset that never comes back. The first signs of trouble never come crashing through the door. They arrive quietly, like the faint creak of wood before the collapse. The kind of sound you only recognize as a warning after the damage is done. With Clara, the change was so gradual that I almost convinced myself it wasn't real. Almost. At first, it was the texts. Clara had always been the kind of woman who filled silence with warmth. When we were apart, she'd send me little fragments of her day, a picture of her coffee, a quote she'd read, a random thought that made her laugh. It wasn't about the words themselves. It was about the connection. Every message felt like a heartbeat, a reminder that we were in sync even when miles apart. But then, those heartbeats started to fade. First, it was fewer texts, then shorter ones. The paragraphs became sentences. The sentences became words, and eventually, even those came with excuses. Sorry, I was in a meeting. Sorry, I fell asleep early. Sorry, my phone died. The apologies stacked up like bricks, now one on top of another, building a quiet wall between us. At first, I brushed it off. Everyone gets busy, right? Maybe work was getting to her. Maybe she just needed space. But deep down, something inside me stirred, a whisper that refused to go silent. Something's wrong. Then came the calls. Clara and I used to talk every night before bed. It was our ritual. We'd recap our days, laugh about small things, make plans for the weekend, say I love you just before drifting off. It was the sound of comfort, the sound of belonging. But suddenly those calls grew shorter. She always sounded distracted, as if her mind was elsewhere, somewhere far away that I couldn't reach. I'd ask her how her day went, and she'd give vague one-word answers. Sometimes she'd sigh mid-conversation and say, "Sorry, I'm just exhausted. Can we talk tomorrow?" Of course I said yes, because that's what love does. It gives grace. But after a while, tomorrow kept turning into another day. I remember one evening vividly. The night the silence between us felt different. I had just gotten home from work, exhausted but excited. I'd made reservations at her favorite restaurant. It was the anniversary of the day we first met. I texted her to remind her. No response. I called once, twice, 3 times. No answer. Finally, an hour later, she replied, "Sorry, can't make it tonight. Something came up at work, that was it. No apology beyond that. No explanation. No, I'll make it up to you." I sat there in the car outside the restaurant, staring at the empty seat beside me, the one she was supposed to fill. The waiter came to ask if my guest was running late, and I smiled politely, lying through my teeth. She'll be here soon. She never came. I ended up eating alone, pushing food around my plate while my mind replayed every conversation we'd ever had, searching for the moment things began to fade. Over the next few weeks, her distance became a pattern. She started spending more nights at work. Her schedule, once predictable, became a maze of late meetings and last-minute plans. I'd call and she'd answer only half the time. Sometimes when she did pick up, there'd be a delay, like she was whispering into the phone or covering the receiver. "Are you busy?" I'd ask. "Yeah, just wrapping something up. I'll call you later, okay?" Later rarely came, but I didn't confront her. Not yet. Because when you love someone that deeply, you cling to denial like it's a life raft. You tell yourself she wouldn't do that. You rewrite reality in softer shades so you can still sleep at night. I started doing more for her, not out of desperation, but out of fear of losing her. I made her favorite meals, pasta with cream sauce and extra garlic, just the way she liked it. I left little notes in her bag, "Thinking of you. Don't forget to smile today." I planned weekend getaways to the countryside, hoping the fresh air and distance from the city would bring us closer again. But something had changed. She used to light up when I surprised her. Now her eyes looked tired, or maybe just uninterested. "Babe, you didn't have to do all this," she'd say, with a faint smile that never reached her eyes. "I wanted to," I'd reply, pretending not to notice the way she checked her phone under the table. The worst part wasn't her disinterest, it was her irritation. The very gestures that once made her heart melt now seemed to annoy her. She'd sigh when I kissed her neck. She'd pull away first when we hugged. Her touch grew brief, mechanical, like she was following a script she no longer believed in. The breaking point came one night in March. It was raining, one of those relentless spring downpours that made the whole city blur. I was driving past her office after a late meeting of my own. Her light was still on, and I thought, why not surprise her? So I stopped at the florist's nearby and picked up a bouquet. White lilies, her favorite. I remember how my hands trembled slightly as I climbed the stairs, how the smell of rain mixed with perfume in the building's hallway. I felt like a man about to propose all over again, When I reached her office door, I saw her through the glass. She wasn't working. She was sitting on her desk, her phone pressed to her ear, smiling. A real smile. The kind I hadn't seen in months. She didn't notice me, and for a few seconds I just stood there frozen. Then she laughed, that same genuine musical laughter that had once made me fall in love with her. Except now, it wasn't for me. When she finally hung up and saw me through the glass, her face changed instantly, from warmth to shock, then irritation. She rushed to the door, her heels clicking sharply on the tile. "Why did you come here?" she hissed under her breath, pulling me aside. "You should have called." Her tone wasn't one of surprise, it was panic. "I just wanted to see you," I said softly, holding up the flowers. "You've been so busy lately, I thought—" "Not here," she interrupted, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "Please, I'll call you later." She didn't even take the flowers. I left them on her desk. By morning, they were gone. That night, something inside me cracked. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was something quieter. A slow realization that the woman standing in front of me wasn't the same one I had built my world around. The love I'd poured my soul into was leaking through invisible holes, and no matter how hard I tried to seal them, it kept slipping away. When I got home, I sat in the dark for a long time. The rain tapped softly against the window, and I thought about every sorry she'd ever said, every busy day, every "I'll call you later." They all sounded the same now, hollow, rehearsed, practiced, and yet I still couldn't bring myself to accuse her. I wasn't ready to see the truth. I wanted to believe there was still a version of us worth saving, so I did what people in love always do when things start falling apart. I blamed myself. Maybe I was too distracted with work. Maybe I wasn't giving her enough attention. Maybe I'd changed, and she hadn't. I spent nights analyzing our conversations, replaying them in my head like old recordings, trying to find the glitch, the moment where love turned into distance, but I couldn't find it. Because betrayal doesn't happen in one moment. It's a slow decay, a series of tiny deaths that you don't notice until you're standing in the ashes, wondering when the fire started. Weeks went by, and her behavior became a pattern I couldn't deny anymore. The late nights, the vague explanations, the secretive phone calls she took in another room, the way she'd step outside to get some air and return 15 minutes later, her expression unreadable. Her smile, that radiant, open smile that once made me feel invincible, began to look like a mask. Perfectly painted, perfectly hollow. Behind it, I could sense something moving in the shadows, something I wasn't supposed to see. I started noticing small details. The faint scent of unfamiliar cologne on her jacket, the sudden change in her playlist, the way she guarded her phone like it was made of glass. Once, I asked casually, "Who keeps texting you so late?" She looked up, startled, just for a second, before laughing it off. "Just work stuff, love." "You're being paranoid." Paranoid. That word stayed with me. It felt like being accused of seeing ghosts when I knew there were footprints in the sand. Still, I said nothing. I smiled, nodded, and kissed her cheek, pretending not to notice that her skin flinched beneath my lips. But inside, the silence between us was growing darker, heavier, and that's how it happens, and not with a bang, but with slow erosion. You don't wake up one morning and realize your partner's in love with someone else. You just start to feel it, in the pauses, in the absence of laughter, in the way they stop looking you in the eyes. Love doesn't die suddenly. It fades, and when it fades, it doesn't scream. It whispers. By the time you hear the whispers, it's already too late. Clara was slipping away from me, not like a storm, but like sand through my fingers. And no matter how hard I tried to hold on, I could feel the space between us widening. I just didn't know yet that those cracks, those subtle shadows behind her smile, were the beginning of something far worse. Because when the heart starts to lie, it never does it halfway. The rain didn't stop that night. It was the kind of rain that blurred the world, that drowned the sound of your own heartbeat. I remember sitting in my car outside that restaurant, watching the drops race down the windshield, watching her, Clara, through that dim, flickering light inside. She looked happy. That was what hurt the most. Not the betrayal itself, not even the man sitting across from her. It was the way she smiled. That same soft, glowing smile I once believed was mine. The smile I used to wake up to. The smile that had once made my darkest days feel bright again. She was giving it to someone else effortlessly, freely, as if it had never belonged to me at all. I sat there in silence. I didn't blink. I didn't cry. It was as if time froze around me, leaving me trapped in that single, cruel moment, a spectator to my own heartbreak. He reached across the table, brushed a strand of hair from her face, and she laughed. That laugh. The one that used to fill my apartment, that used to echo between our walls late at night when we couldn't stop talking. Now it was his. The world didn't explode. There were no lightning strikes, no screams, no cinematic breakdowns, just silence. That's how truth destroys you. Not with noise, but with quiet, merciless clarity. I should have walked away. Any sane man would have driven off, tried to forget. But love doesn't work like that, does it? Love turns you into something else, part detective, part ghost, part fool. So I stayed. I watched her for hours. Watched them talk, laugh, touch. Watched them stand up together and walk out of the restaurant into the rain, her arm looped through his like it used to be through mine. They didn't notice me. I followed them, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't not. My hands trembled on the steering wheel as I trailed behind their car at a safe distance. They drove through the city, turning down familiar roads, and then my chest tightened when I saw where they stopped. A hotel. She didn't even hesitate. The man handed the valet his keys, and they both walked inside under a single umbrella and laughing. Laughing while the rain fell around them, while my entire world was collapsing. I parked on the opposite side of the street and just sat there. The pain wasn't sharp anymore. It was heavy, suffocating, like my heart had been replaced by a stone. And in that suffocating silence, I realized something. The woman I had built my life around no longer existed. Whatever Clara I had loved, the one who promised forever, who told me she couldn't live without me, she was gone. The woman walking into that hotel was someone else entirely. Someone colder. Someone capable of looking me in the eyes every day while living a lie. I didn't confront her that night. I didn't call her. I didn't even try to stop her. I just drove home. The drive back was endless. The rain seemed louder, heavier, like it was mocking me. My hands shook on the steering wheel, my vision blurred. Every light I passed reflected her face, her laughter, her betrayal. When I finally reached home, the silence of the house was unbearable. Her things were everywhere. Her perfume still lingered in the air. Her coat still hung by the door. Her favorite mug still sat on the counter. I walked through the rooms like a stranger. Every object screamed her name. Every corner held a memory, and then I sat down. No tears, no rage. Just numbness. I remember staring at my hands, realizing they were the same hands that had held her so many times. The same hands that had built a life for her. Now they felt useless, empty. I don't know how long I sat there, minutes, hours, time lost meaning. Then her message came. Still at the office, love. Don't wait up for me. I'll be home late. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. She was lying even now, and as if nothing had changed, as if she could still fool me. I could have confronted her right then. I could have driven back and dragged the truth out of her. But I didn't. Because somewhere deep inside, something colder than heartbreak was taking root. Something darker. I realized that love and hate aren't opposites, they're twins. And when one dies, the other takes its place. In that moment, I made a decision. I wouldn't expose her. I wouldn't beg her to stay or curse her for leaving. No, that would be too easy for her. She'd cry, she'd apologize, she'd twist the story until I doubted myself. That's what people like her do. So instead, I'd let her keep her lie. I'd let her think she'd won. Because revenge, true revenge, isn't about screaming or violence. It's about silence. It's about patience. It's about watching the person who destroyed you slowly crumble under the weight of what they did. That night, as the rain continued to fall outside, I deleted her message. Then one by one I began erasing the pictures of us. Not because I wanted to forget, but because I wanted to prepare. Each photo I deleted felt like removing a piece of my past, stripping her of the power she once had over me. When I was done, I looked at the last picture left on my phone. The two of us smiling, arms wrapped around each other, standing on the edge of the sea. I almost smiled back. Almost. Then I deleted that one too. And as the screen went black, I whispered quietly to myself, not in anger, but in promise. You'll never see it coming. That night marked the end of us, and the beginning of something else. Something colder. Because when love dies in silence, revenge is born in whispers, and mine had just begun. They say revenge is best served cold, but mine would be colder than the rain that night. I didn't confront Clara immediately. That's what she expected, a fight, an explosion, a storm of anger and heartbreak. She probably rehearsed it in her mind, imagining me shouting, demanding answers, maybe even begging her to explain. But when I came home that next morning, I gave her nothing. No fury, no tears, no accusations. Just silence. Silence. The kind that unsettles even the most confident liar. I walked through the front door as if nothing had happened. She was making breakfast, humming to herself, pretending her world was intact. When she saw me, she smiled, that same practiced guilty smile she'd used to hide the truth. "Morning," she said softly. "You're up early," I smiled back. "Yeah, couldn't sleep." Then I kissed her forehead, poured myself some coffee, and sat down at the table, calm, controlled, colder than I'd ever been. Inside, I was burning. My blood boiled with the images of her laughing with him under the restaurant lights, walking into that hotel without hesitation. But outwardly, I was a mirror of serenity. That's how I knew I'd already begun to win. Clara thought she had control. She thought her secret affair gave her power, that she was the one orchestrating everything from behind her charming smile. But what she didn't know was that the moment I saw her that night, the moment I watched her walk into that hotel, the balance of power shifted. I was no longer the broken man she could manipulate. I was the storm she didn't see coming. Over the next few weeks, I played my role perfectly. I listened when she spoke, nodded when she lied, and kissed her goodnight like a dutiful partner. But beneath that calm surface, I was observing everything, recording, remembering, planning. Her phone habits changed subtly, and I took note. She'd angle the screen away when I walked by. She'd go out for groceries and come back with nothing but an empty expression. At first, I thought her guilt would catch up to her, that she'd confess. But guilt doesn't visit people like Clara, not until it's invited. So I invited it. I started small, pulling back emotionally. No more random calls during the day. No sweet texts. No surprises. She noticed almost immediately. "Are you okay?" she asked one night as we sat in the living room. I looked at her, expression unreadable. "Yeah, just tired." She smiled faintly, relieved. "You've been working so hard lately." "Yeah," I replied softly. "I guess I just realized I've been investing too much energy into the wrong things." She blinked. There was a flicker of something. Confusion, maybe even fear, but I didn't elaborate. I just turned my attention back to the TV, and that's when the first seed of doubt took root in her mind. While I withdrew emotionally, I advanced strategically. I began collecting evidence quietly, methodically. I knew where she kept her laptop, and I knew her password, the same one she'd used since we met, our anniversary date. The irony almost made me laugh. At night, when she was asleep, I'd check her messages, screenshots, email drafts, calendar notes. It was all there. Every lie, every meeting, every message with him. I didn't react. I simply stored everything, photos, times, places, in a private folder labeled Project Silence. I started to understand their pattern. Thursdays, sometimes Fridays, always the same hotel, always the same excuses, late meeting, client dinner, team event. I even followed them a few more times, staying hidden in the shadows, watching from a distance. Every time I saw them together, the pain dulled a little more, replaced by something sharper, something cleaner, clarity. This wasn't love anymore. This was war, but I didn't want chaos. Chaos is easy. I wanted precision, because real revenge doesn't scream, it whispers. So I began to rebuild myself. While she was busy sneaking around, I was transforming. I went to the gym daily, started dressing better, focused more on work. I closed new deals, made new contacts, even began networking with people who once seemed far above my reach. I became the man she'd one day wish she hadn't lost. Confidence is magnetic, and soon enough she felt the shift. She started noticing the changes, the way I carried myself, the quiet confidence in my voice, the way others began to look at me with respect and admiration. The balance between us shifted quietly and visibly. One night, while we were getting ready for bed, she turned to me and said, "You've changed lately." I looked up from my phone and smiled faintly. Maybe I just stopped pretending everything was perfect. Her eyes searched mine. "What do you mean?" "Nothing," I said. "Good night, Clara." And I turned off the lights. That silence was louder than any argument could ever be. The cracks in her mask started to show after that. She became more cautious, more nervous. She'd ask questions she never asked before. "Do you still love me?" "You're not mad at me, are you?" "You've been distant lately." Each time I'd give the same calm answer. Everything's fine, but everything wasn't fine. Everything was falling perfectly into place. I began planting subtle reminders, little things only she would notice. A receipt from a restaurant she didn't know I'd visited, left carelessly on the counter, a faint trace of perfume on my jacket. Not mine, of course. A phone call answered in another room, followed by silence when she entered. Each seed of doubt I planted grew into fear inside her mind. She began to feel what I had felt. Uncertainty, suspicion, unease. That was my revenge, and not her pain but her paranoia, because guilt doesn't destroy you all at once. It eats you slowly from the inside out. Weeks turned into months. By now I had everything I needed, every message, every photo, every piece of evidence. But I wasn't ready to expose her. Not yet, no, exposure would only end it. I wanted it to unravel. I wanted her to experience the quiet panic of watching the world she built with lies begin to collapse, without understanding how or when it began. So, I started the second phase. I became unpredictable. Sometimes affectionate, sometimes distant. Sometimes I'd take her hand, kiss her softly, and whisper, "I love you." Other times I'd barely look at her for days. She couldn't read me anymore. And the more she tried to understand, the more she unraveled. One evening I came home later than usual. She was waiting by the door, her face pale. "Where were you?" she asked. I shrugged. "Out. With who?" I smiled faintly. "Does it matter?" Her voice trembled. "Of course it matters." "Funny," I said, stepping past her. "That's exactly what I used to think." That was the night she broke. She tried to hold me, to apologize for things she hadn't yet confessed. I could feel her shaking, not from sadness but from fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of losing me. And that's when I knew. The plan was working. Revenge isn't about destruction. It's about balance. About letting the betrayer drown in the same silence they once made you live through. Every time she smiled nervously, every time she over-explained, every time she looked at me searching for forgiveness I never offered, I knew I was winning. She was unraveling, one lie at a time, and the best part? She didn't even realize I hadn't said a word. Because sometimes silence isn't the absence of sound, it's the presence of power. And my silence? It was deafening. The night I chose to unmask her, the city felt like a stage. Every light, every passerby a distant audience. I picked the restaurant with care. The same one where I had first seen Clara laugh with him beneath the glow of candles and the sheen of rain. It would be precise, symbolic, an echo that would not let her forget how she'd reallocated our story. I booked a corner table that overlooked the window. It was private enough for intimacy, public enough for spectacle. The maître d' recognized me with a polite nod. He'd watched our routine over the years, our anniversary dinners, the quiet business lunches, and he wondered nothing when I arrived alone an hour early. I sat there, ordered a glass of wine, and watched the door. When she walked in, the room softened. She looked as she always had when she wanted to command attention. Hair done, dress chosen to balance allure and taste, the sort of perfume that announced arrival without shouting. She smiled when she saw me, the smile that had once been my favorite sunrise. It was a practiced movement now, polished to hide the tremor beneath. We started with small talk, the way people do when they are trying to calibrate whether the storm is immediate or months away. She asked about work. I asked about a workshop she'd mentioned the week before. We exchanged pleasantries like two actors finishing each other's lines. Then I slid the envelope across the table. Her hand paused midair. Her smile thinned as curiosity touched the edges of her expression. She opened it with a casualness she hoped would fool me. Her fingers fluttered, betraying the lie. The first photograph slipped into view. A grainy image of her at that table. Same angle, same laugh, with his hand resting possessively on hers. There were more. Messages printed, time-stamped. Screenshots of locations, timestamps that traced a route I already knew. Each piece of evidence was a small clinical incision into the body of our life. She went through them as if moving through a dream. Perplexed, then unmoored, then incredulous. Color drained from her face in stages like a film fading under a light. Her lips opened and closed. The sound of her breath became too loud in my ears. For a moment, maybe two, she looked like the girl who'd once laughed in the bookstore, honest and unafraid. Then that girl was gone. In her place was a person whose mask had finally cracked. How did you, she stammered, words colliding with one another, meaningless without punctuation. She tried to crumple them into some narrative that made sense. It's not what you think, she began, then stopped, perhaps because even she could not remember the truth of what we once had. People glanced over. Forks paused midair. The clinking of silverware that cushioned the room before seemed suddenly loud. The couple at the next table turned to observe, curiosity written in slow, polite motions. When you break a private thing in public, the world leans in like an animal listening for a second song. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't reach for the drama she probably expected. The movie moments, the shouting, the slamming of doors are easy. They're immediate and messy and performative. There's power in restraint. So I sat very still and let the evidence do what words couldn't. It told the truth, without my breathless interpretation. "Clara," I said finally, and my voice was soft and level, "this is who you chose to be. Not me, you broke us, not me. And now you will live with what you've done." She cried then, first in small, shocked bursts, then in a tremulous sob that tried to take up the room. Begging arrived like a rehearsed act. Apologies, tearful explanations, fragments of excuses she had likely prepared in the privacy of her hotel room. She tried to fold herself into an apology, wrap it up and send it back as if it were a returned purchase. She tried to make me the villain who'd found her under a spotlight and left her gracelessly exposed. "You don't understand," she whispered, clutching the photos as if they were evidence not of her guilt but of some unfair trap. "It happened because you were never there. You were always working." I was there," I replied quietly. "I was there for everything. You just stopped being there for us." She reached across the table, fingers trembling, searching for mine with the same instinct that once had steadied me, a physical plea to re-anchor what had been severed. I pulled my hand back before it touched hers. The look on her face was not only despair, it was the disbelief of someone who'd gambled on a lie and then discovered that the stakes had been raised without her consent. She called me names I'd once called endearments. She cried for the old days. She tried to shift blame to the mundane, stress, distance, misunderstanding. She invoked moments I could not deny, then bent them into explanations that required my forgiveness as payment. She asked me if I wanted her to be honest now that she'd been found out. I did not answer. Therein lay the cruelty she could not comprehend. Silence is not just absence. It is a verdict. It forces the accused to sit with the full geometry of their actions, without the shelter of defense. It leaves them alone with their conscience, which is a louder judge than any courtroom. The maitre d' approached with the check before I had to ask. He did so with a practiced discretion, the kind of courtesy reserved for scenes that could ruin a restaurant's Sunday dinner crowd with too much spectacle. I placed my card on the folder, signed, and without raising my head walked out. Outside, the night swallowed me. The rain had started again, a soft, steady curtain that blurred the neon and made every light spill like a watercolor. I did not look back at Clara. I did not watch as she crumpled into her chair, stunned by the emptiness I left in my wake. I had already seen everything I needed to see. Her public dismantling was done, but the confrontation was not the end of the story. Not for me, not for her. Exposing the lie was a point of clarity, a hammer that cleared away the debris of illusions. It was necessary, a moment of finality that would allow the next moves to be made with clean hands. There are people who want revenge to be a spectacle, a riot of shattered glass and exposed veins. I had never wanted spectacle. I wanted consequence. I wanted her to feel the slow, precise erosion of what she had built on thinnest air. The envelope on the table had been merely the ceremonial act. The deeper work would be quieter and I hoped more irrevocable. On the drive home, the city lights smeared into long, reflective bands across the wet pavement. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. Anger had been replaced by something sterner. The iron clarity of a man who had seen the truth and decided he would not be a casualty. I replayed the evening not as a litany of damage but as an opening move. She had been unmasked. Now I would orchestrate the rest. When I entered our apartment, the place was eerily normal. Her shoes by the door, a scarf thrown over the back of a chair, a mug still drying in the sink. She had left, I presumed, to gather herself or to call someone in desperation. Maybe she went to him. Maybe she stayed and composed a letter to the future. I did not care which. Her choices were her responsibility now. I gathered the materials I had assembled over the months, screenshots, timestamps, copies of messages and invoices, a list of witnesses who could corroborate times and places. I organized them with the same clinical calm with which I had once organized business plans. Only now the commodity was truth and the market was consequences. The rest of that night I made phone calls. Not loud, angry calls and measured ones. Lawyers not as threats but as options. Bankers for clarity on accounts. Friends who had stood on the fringes of our life. People who knew pieces of the truth but not its full contour. I did not shout. I did not demand. I asked questions, took notes, and built a dossier that would outlast anyone's ability to smear it with emotion. This was the part she had not anticipated. She had thought that by keeping secrets she kept control. She had relied on my predictable reactions and my habit of forgiveness. She had not accounted for the patient accumulation of facts, for the day when those facts would be illuminated and used to construct a different kind of justice, the quiet, inevitable sort. When I finally went to bed hours later, I did not sleep like a man who had been avenged. I slept like someone who had been reborn into a life where pity had been traded for strategy. I did not gloat. I did not celebrate. I prepared, because truth revealed is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of accountability. And the masks that fall off in public tend to come with consequences that ripple far beyond a single dinner. I would not tear her down with fury. I would let the architecture of her life, built on deceit, begin to show its cracks. I would let friends, colleagues, creditors, and partners make their independent calculations when the facts touched them. I would move in the daylight where everything mattered and nothing remained hidden. The confrontation had been the ceremonial unveiling. Now, the slow, methodical work of consequence would begin. And that, I knew with the cold certainty that had replaced my grief, would be the part she never saw coming. The morning after the restaurant felt like an odd, thin thing, daylight with no warmth. I woke to the small, familiar noises of our apartment, the hum of the fridge, the distant rumble of traffic, the way sunlight edged the blinds in neat, indifferent lines. For a moment I looked around, half expecting to see her silhouette moving toward the kitchen. Then I remembered the envelope on the table, the photos, the way she'd tried to stitch her story back together while I watched. That memory was like a compass. It pointed me where I needed to go. She called once, twice, 3 times. Each ring was a punctuation mark, a small demand. I watched her name flash on the screen and I turned the phone face down. I could have answered. I could have taken the calls and listened to whatever blend of apology, confession, begging she had in reserve. But I'd decided that mercy delivered in the moment she expected it would be nothing more than a mask, and masks were her specialty. So I let it ring. I let the unanswered calls collect like rain in a gutter. She left voicemail after voicemail. Her voice, recorded and coming through in splinters, shifted from raw to practiced to pleading. Please, one said. Come home. Let's talk. Another. I didn't mean. A later one was quieter, ashamed. I never listened. I let them collect in the same way I let the photographs collect on my phone, as data, as truth, as fuel. Weeks passed. I maintained a sort of public routine so ordinary it looked boring. I went to work. I closed deals. I attended meetings. I smiled at acquaintances and returned the exact amount of intimacy expected in polite conversation. But beneath the surface I was deliberate. Every meeting, every handshake, every late-night email stitched me to a new life. Clara's reaction was a study in slow collapse. At first she called friends, a flurry of frantic explanations and whispered confessions meant to be private. For weeks she tried to control the narrative. Emails to mutual friends that preempted gossip. Dinner invitations that tried to re-anchor her image. She texted the man she'd left me for with a frequency that read like panic disguised as affection. When he didn't respond with the care she expected, her temperament changed, from confident to bargaining to incredulous. She dialed numbers that once felt safe and found voicemail. She knocked on doors and received polite, hesitant smiles. The man, he was not built for devotion. He liked the thrill of possession, the secret rendezvous, the adrenaline. But when the secret required consequence, when the smoke of novelty cleared and commitment was asked of him, he stepped back. The first time she looked for reassurance from him and found only the cool tilt of indifference, the look on her face was something I'd seen before, the precise face I'd worn in the car outside the restaurant. She'd traded a steady life for a rumor. She'd traded truth for a flirtation. And the flirtation had left. Her friends were the next matrix to shift. You can carry strangers through scandal with explanations and sob stories, but friends are a mirror. They had been part of the web she'd woven. The same people who had toasted our engagement, who had listened to our plans in kitchens and pubs. Rumor is an itch. Facts are a burn. Once I let slip a few carefully placed, verifiable details, not in anger, but as neutral statements when the subject came up. The circle tightened. People who had once mingled with us casually began to look at her in a different light. Invitations stopped arriving. Messages became shorter, then stopped. A brunch that had been a fixture on Sundays became a void. At first she begged. "It's a misunderstanding," she told one mutual friend. Later she tried to explain. "I made a mistake." That phrasing, a mistake, is the polite term for a choice that unravels reputations. Friends who are as invested in their own integrity as yours don't want to be seen endorsing bad decisions. Work, too, turned against her. The woman who had once executed projects with poise found the narrative of her competence deteriorating under her own weight. She arrived late. She missed deadlines. Meetings she would once have dominated were now patched together apologies and half-finished slides. Her focus fractured like reflected light. Once, during a client presentation, she blanked on an important number. I watched the professional confidence drain from her colleagues' faces like water from a bowl. In business, perception is telescopic. One misstep magnifies until competence is questioned. The promotions she'd been in line for were postponed. Complaints she'd once swatted away became talking points behind closed doors. I did not orchestrate every piece of it. I did not smear or shout. The beauty of silence is that life does the violent work for you if you've placed the truth where it matters. I had set nothing on fire. I had simply stepped out of the narrative and watched the story correct itself. Meanwhile, I rebuilt. Rebuilding is a quiet industry. It requires patience and a refusal to be performative about healing. I joined a gym and started the kind of routine people usually write about only in the clean margins of success stories. Early lifts, disciplined meals, enough sleep to be honest about fatigue. The mirror reflected a man softened by pain but honed by intent. I learned to carry myself in a way that suggested a man who had nothing to prove. At work I moved with a kind of strategic clarity. Meetings that once felt like endurance tests became places of contribution and authority. I began to say no to things that wasted time. Yes to the projects that mattered, and the outcomes followed. I slept better. I ate better. I responded less and planned more. There were nights when the quiet hit me like a hand. I'd sit alone and let the absence of her voice press against my ribs. In those moments, the temptation to call, to reach out, to explain, to collapse into the old easy love, arrived like a familiar scent. But each time I resisted, not out of cruelty, but out of a cleaner kind of self-preservation. Whatever we had built had been compromised. Rebuilding would mean honoring the pieces that were real and letting go of the parts tethered to betrayal. People noticed the difference. Colleagues started to defer to me more often. A client complimented my composure in a way that felt like a benediction. Old friends reconnected not with pity but with curiosity, wanting to know what had shifted. There was, too, an unexpected kind of attractiveness in the quiet decisiveness I'd cultivated, not the loud, desperate show of someone begging for attention, but the undercurrent of someone who had authority over his own life. Clara, watching from the periphery, saw it all. She watched my posts on social media, a photo of a new project, a shot from a hiking trip, the occasional image of me laughing with friends. She must have seen the way invitations to speak at an industry event arrived. She must have heard rumors of a promotion. These were small things, but to someone still in the process of unraveling, They look like proof that the world keeps working against you while it works for someone else. The first time I walked into a room and felt her glance like an accusation, I noticed how hollow her stare had become. Once the main line of dignity is cut, you learn to spot the echo of it in other people's faces. Her attempts at repair degenerated into performances. She sent emails that carried the wrong tone, half apology, half demand for restoration, and she misfired often enough that people who'd once sympathized stepped away. She reached out to mutual friends with messages that read like drafts of a life she wanted to reclaim. Those friends offered sympathy at a remove. They let her feel heard but didn't lean in. It's a merciless thing, watching a life after it's been rearranged by choices that only you made. The pity she sought was rationed. People protect themselves. Isolation is the quiet corollary to scandal. And then there were the trivial, delicious moments of consequence I'd not engineered but observed with a kind of neutral satisfaction. A canceled invitation to a family gathering that had once been scheduled months in advance. A title removed from her bio at work. A coffee machine she liked discontinued because she'd cavilled to a vendor in a way that burned a bridge. These were small avalanches, not spectacles. They were the day-to-day recalibration of a life that had been built with false currency. During all of this, I did not gloat publicly. I didn't post accusatory messages or private stories as if broadcasting a verdict. Instead, I let time do the work. Silence, as I'd learned, has a social gravity to it. People fill quiet with meaning. They project narrative into the gaps you leave. That projection often hurts the culprit more than anything you could say. The truth, once present, is relentless in the long run. Months after that rainy Thursday, I stood at a colleague's ceremony, a promotion I'd helped secure. They asked me to speak. I spoke about resilience, about the small daily decisions that define a life. I didn't mention Clara, I didn't need to. There, under the bright lights and the polite applause, I realized my revenge had not been in her ruin, but in my becoming. The applause that night was not a remedy for pain, but it was a confirmation that life moves forward for those who act with integrity, and for those who refuse to be defined by another person's betrayal. One afternoon later, I ran into her on the street. By chance or by design, I don't know. She was thinner, eyes rimmed with fatigue. For a brief second, she looked like the woman who had read in stores, who had laughed at pages, who had trusted the world enough to give me her heart. Then recognition sharpened, and she looked away. There was no plea in her eyes then, only a small, tired calculation. I walked on. That was the final act in its quiet way. Not a scene, not a theft, not an explosion. Just two lives moving in separate directions. Mine rebuilt, measured, and firm. Hers fragmented, raw, and alone. If revenge was what the story demanded, and I would not argue with anyone who called it that, it was not the dramatic undoing of a person. It was the patient, inevitable accounting that follows when truth is given the space to act. People tend to want a breaking point, a shout, a scandal, a courtroom drama. I found in the slow unraveling of consequences something purer and more irrevocable. She had been given the choice of her life. She took a path that destroyed what she'd been entrusted with. Life, in its bland impartiality, punished her with the day-to-day reality of that choice. Silence had been my loudest sentence. It spoke of boundaries kept, dignity retained, and a future rebuilt without the weight of a past I no longer wanted. And in the echo of that silence, I found something I hadn't expected. Not simply revenge, but release. It was one of those evenings that felt too polished to be real. Chandeliers glowing like captured stars. The low hum of conversation wrapped in soft jazz. Crystal glasses catching the light with every gesture. The business gala was one of the biggest events of the year. A celebration of success and power. I was there as a guest of honor, a recognition of the company's record-breaking quarter. My quarter, the one I had built from the ashes of betrayal. When I stepped into the ballroom, every step felt deliberate. Every handshake, every greeting, every nod of acknowledgement carried a quiet power I had earned. Months ago, I was a man broken by lies. Now I was someone people sought out. For advice, partnership, respect. Success had given me back my confidence. But healing had given me something deeper. Control. I was standing near the bar talking to a group of investors. When I felt it, that strange familiar shift in the air. A presence. I turned and there she was, Clara. For a heartbeat, everything froze. The room, the music, the voices, all of it dimmed into a soft blur behind her. My mind didn't flood with rage or longing. It was something quieter, steadier, the stillness that comes when you realize the storm has passed and you're still standing. She hadn't changed much on the surface. Same soft curls, same graceful movements, but the light that once danced in her eyes was gone. There was a brittleness to her, like glass that had been dropped and glued back together, intact but never the same. Our eyes met, and I watched realization ripple through her face. She froze in place, her lips parting slightly as if trying to find breath in a moment she hadn't prepared for, and I knew instantly she hadn't expected to see me like this. She had expected the ghost of the man she broke, fragile, bitter, still nursing invisible wounds. Instead, she saw someone unrecognizable, composed, confident, whole, the kind of man she had once dreamed of being beside. For a long second, neither of us moved. Then, almost mechanically, she began to walk toward me. Each step was heavy, uncertain. She clutched her small purse like it was something to hold her together. People turned slightly as she passed, their gazes flickering, some recognizing her, some whispering. The sound of her heels clicking on the marble floor echoed like a countdown. When she finally stood in front of me, she forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hi," she said softly, her voice barely carrying over the music. I looked at her, really looked at her. There was guilt etched into every corner of her face, regret sitting like a shadow beneath her eyes. I nodded once, polite, measured. "Clara." My tone was calm, controlled. That alone seemed to unsettle her more than anger ever could. She looked around at the people near me. Colleagues laughing, business partners offering handshakes, friends clinking glasses. She could see it, the respect, the success, the quiet admiration that surrounded me. I didn't need to prove anything. My life spoke for itself. Her voice trembled as she spoke again. "You look good, really good." "Thank you," I said evenly. "You too." But we both knew it was a lie. Her eyes darted away, then back. "I heard about your promotion. And the new branch. You've done amazing things," I smiled faintly. "I've been busy." There was so much she wanted to say, and I could see the words forming and dying behind her eyes. Apologies, explanations, justifications. The ghosts of every conversation we never had. Finally, she took a small breath and whispered, "I made a mistake." Her voice cracked on the last word. It wasn't a rehearsed apology. It was something raw, desperate. The kind of confession that comes only when life has already delivered its punishment. I didn't move. Didn't flinch. I just met her gaze and said quietly, "We all make choices, and we all live with them." She swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "I never meant to hurt you, I didn't know what I wanted. A bitter truth, perhaps, but still an excuse. I raised a hand gently, stopping her. "Clara," I said, my voice low, steady, final. "You made your choice, and I made mine." The silence between us felt enormous. Around us, laughter carried on, glasses clinked. The band played softly. The world moved forward even as she stood still. Her lips trembled, eyes glistening with tears she refused to let fall. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. What could she say? "I'm sorry" wasn't enough. "I regret" it wasn't redemption. She had gambled something irreplaceable and lost. And there it was, the justice I'd been waiting for. Not loud, not violent, but quiet, dignified, inevitable. I didn't need to destroy her. Life had already done that. I didn't need to humiliate her. Her reflection did that every morning. I didn't need to prove I'd moved on. I was the proof. My peace, my success, my stillness, and that was justice. I smiled politely, the same way you might at a stranger you once knew. "Take care, Clara," I said softly, then turned back toward my colleagues. She stood there for a moment, frozen, watching me, surrounded by people, laughter, life. Then slowly she turned and walked away, her figure blending into the crowd, swallowed by the glow of chandeliers and the music of a world that no longer belonged to her. As she disappeared from view, I felt something unexpected, not triumph, not vengeance, but peace. Real peace. The kind that doesn't shout. The kind that comes when you finally understand that justice isn't about hurting the one who hurt you. It's about no longer needing to. I lifted my glass, joining the conversation around me. Someone laughed, another complimented my latest project. The night carried on effortlessly. And somewhere in that golden haze of music and celebration, I realized something profound. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it just smiles, quietly, beautifully, and walks away. That night, I realized something powerful. I no longer needed her. It wasn't a dramatic moment. There were no tears, no shouting, no sudden surge of anger, just quiet clarity, the kind that settles in after a long storm, when the wind dies down and the world feels still again. For the first time in months, I could finally breathe without the weight of her memory pressing on my chest. For so long, my life had revolved around Clara, loving her, pleasing her, forgiving her. I had built my world around someone who didn't deserve it. Every decision, every plan, every dream, all of it was shaped with her in mind. I used to believe that love meant sacrifice, that loyalty meant holding on no matter what. But betrayal has a cruel way of teaching you who you really are without the person you thought you couldn't live without. And who was I? I was stronger. I was wiser. I was free. I stopped replaying the night that had once haunted me, that rainy evening when I sat in my car, watching her through the restaurant window laughing with another man. That image used to burn in my mind like a brand. It used to keep me awake, replaying every smile, every touch, every lie. But now when I thought of it, it didn't sting anymore. It felt distant, like something that had happened to someone else. Because in a way, it had. The man I was back then, desperate for answers, drowning in heartbreak, clinging to memories. He was gone. The person standing in his place was reborn through pain, rebuilt through silence, and refined through time. I started to appreciate the little things again. The morning coffee that used to taste bitter now felt like a reward. The sun coming through my window reminded me that life, no matter how broken it feels, keeps moving forward. I began laughing again, not the forced kind of laughter I had used to convince people I was fine, but real laughter, the kind that comes from genuine peace. And my friends, those who had stayed through the storm, who had seen me at my lowest, they became my anchor. They reminded me that loyalty and love still existed, just not always in the form we expect. We started going out more, sharing stories, creating new memories that had nothing to do with Clara. Each one pulled me further away from the version of myself that had been trapped in her shadow. Then came work. I poured myself into it, not as an escape, but as a way to rebuild. Each project, each success, each promotion reminded me that I was capable on my own. I didn't need validation from anyone. I didn't need her praise or her presence to feel complete. The power that I had once handed over to her I had taken back, and it felt incredible. Months turned into a year. Seasons changed, and one quiet evening, I found myself walking along the same street where I had once seen her hand in hand with the man she had chosen over me. I stopped for a moment, not out of pain, but out of realization. That place, that memory, no longer held power over me. I looked around. The streetlights, the soft hum of the city, the scent of rain in the air, and I smiled, because I wasn't standing there as the broken man who had once cried behind the wheel. I was standing there as someone who had survived, grown, and learned. That was the moment I truly understood what peace feels like. It's not about revenge. It's not about seeing the other person suffer. It's about reaching a point where their existence no longer defines your emotions, where their name no longer has the power to shake you, where you can look back without anger, just acceptance. Eventually, I opened my heart again, not recklessly, not blindly, but with patience. I didn't rush to fill the emptiness. I learned to wait, to observe, to let people show me who they really were before I gave them access to my heart. And when love did find me again, it felt different. It wasn't a whirlwind or an obsession. It was calm, gentle, honest. The kind of love that doesn't demand you lose yourself in the process. One evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the sunset, a message from an unknown number flashed on my phone. It was her. "I hope you're doing well. I think about you sometimes." I stared at it for a moment. The old me would have felt a pang of nostalgia, a temptation to reply to see if something could still be salvaged. But that part of me was long gone. I simply smiled, locked the screen, and set the phone aside, because I no longer needed closure. I no longer needed answers. I no longer needed her. Clara had become a chapter in my story, one filled with lessons, growth, and strength. Sometimes I would think of her, but not with bitterness, just with quiet understanding. She was the storm that broke me, but also the storm that shaped me. And that, more than anything, was my victory. I walked away stronger, not because I won, not because I proved her wrong, but because I found myself again. That's the thing about heartbreak. It doesn't destroy you unless you let it. It refines you. It burns away everything false until only truth remains. And the truth is this: we don't always get to choose what happens to us, but we always get to choose what we become because of it. As I took one last look at the fading sky, I whispered softly to myself, thank you, not to her, but to the pain, to the silence, to the lessons that had built me, because without them I would never have discovered the strength that had been inside me all along. And with that, I stood up, turned away, and walked forward, not looking back this time. Because real revenge isn't destruction, it's peace. And I had finally found mine. If you've ever been betrayed, you know the pain. It's not just emotional, it's physical. It feels like something deep inside you has been torn apart. The air feels heavier. Every heartbeat feels slower, and your world, the one you trusted, suddenly collapses into pieces. You replay conversations, moments, laughter, wondering where it all went wrong. You ask yourself how someone who claimed to love you could hurt you so deeply. Betrayal is cruel like that. It doesn't just break your heart, and it shatters your faith. But here's the thing I learned. As merciless as betrayal is, it carries a hidden gift. It teaches you. When you're standing in the ruins of your trust, when your soul feels scraped raw and you can't see a way forward, that's when the real lessons begin. You start seeing people and yourself more clearly than ever before. You learn that not everyone deserves your loyalty, that not everyone who calls you friend or love has your best interest at heart. Some people smile at you while holding the knife meant for your back, and it's not your job to hate them. It's your job to recognize them and walk away. You learn that love, no matter how strong, must never come at the cost of your self-respect. You can give your heart, yes, but never your identity. Because once you lose yourself for someone else, betrayal becomes twice as painful. You learn that trust is sacred, something that must be earned, not blindly handed over just because someone asks for it. And when that trust is broken, it's okay to step back, to rebuild your walls, to guard your peace. But most of all, betrayal teaches you about yourself. I learned that I was stronger than I ever imagined. I learned that pain doesn't last forever. It just changes form. It sharpens you, molds you, and if you let it, it can turn you into something unbreakable. There was a time when I believed Clara had destroyed me. Her lies, her affair, her coldness, or by it all felt like a death sentence. But as the months passed, I realized something powerful. She hadn't broken me. She had revealed me. She exposed the parts of me that needed to grow. She forced me to face the flaws I had ignored, my blind trust, my habit of forgiving too easily, my fear of being alone. And once I faced those things, I found freedom. Betrayal showed me the difference between attachment and love. Attachment says, I can't live without you. Love says, even if you leave, I will still be whole. It taught me that peace is not found in revenge, but in acceptance. Revenge feeds the ego. Acceptance feeds the soul. I realized that the sweetest revenge is not in destroying someone else. It's in rebuilding yourself so beautifully, so completely, that their betrayal becomes meaningless. Because the moment you find peace, the moment you stand tall again and smile without bitterness, that's when you've won. Clara thought she had taken everything from me. She thought she had left me broken, wandering, defeated, but she was wrong. In truth, she had given me something invaluable. The chance to start over, to rise stronger, to rediscover who I was beneath the pain. She gave me clarity. I learned to appreciate honesty more deeply, to cherish loyalty more fiercely, and to protect my heart with wisdom rather than walls. I stopped needing validation from others and started finding it within myself. I stopped chasing love that hurt and began waiting for love that healed. And maybe that's what betrayal really is, a brutal teacher. It doesn't whisper. It screams. It doesn't ask politely. It forces you to evolve. One day I saw Clara again, briefly. She looked at me with a mixture of regret and disbelief, as if she couldn't understand how I had turned out fine, even better than before. I didn't feel the need to gloat or remind her of what she'd done. I just smiled, because her opinion, her choices, her betrayal, none of it mattered anymore. I had outgrown the pain, and that's the secret most people don't realize. Healing isn't forgetting. It's remembering without the ache. It's being able to revisit the story without reliving the wound. It's knowing what happened, but also knowing it no longer defines you. I stopped asking, why did this happen to me? And started saying, what is this teaching me? That shift changed everything. Pain teaches patience. Loss teaches gratitude. Betrayal teaches self-worth. And when you finally understand that, nothing and no one can truly break you again. Sometimes, we think the end of a relationship is the end of our story. But it's not. It's just the end of a chapter. A painful one, yes, but necessary. Because endings create space for beginnings, for healing, for growth. Now, when I look back, I don't see tragedy. I see transformation. I see a person who learned to walk alone, to rebuild, to love again with caution but without fear. I see someone who stopped defining himself by what was lost and started defining himself by what was gained. Clara will always be part of my past, but she no longer has power over my future. And that realization, that peace, is priceless. So if you've been betrayed, remember this. Your pain has purpose. It's shaping you, sharpening you, and preparing you for something better. Don't let bitterness take root where growth should be, because betrayal doesn't define you, your response does. And one day, when you look back at the ashes, you'll realize you didn't just survive, and you evolved. You became wiser, calmer, stronger. You'll smile at the person you've become and whisper the truth that only those who've walked through the fire can understand. I'm grateful for what broke me, because it showed me what I'm made of, and that quiet, unshakable peace is the ultimate revenge.